Welcome back, everyone. And today we are continuing with our lesson on Hillel and Shammai, which, if you watch the last lecture or listen to the last lecture, if I can even talk, you will have gotten a brief explanation and brief background, or beefy background, I don't know, of Hillel and Shammai, who they are, who were their teachers, a little bit of their persuasion in terms of who was a bit more merciful, who was a bit more strict, which both, by the way, are very good. And there's actually a ruling where the sages said, be merciful and lenient with other people, but be strict with yourself. So basically, if you want to be demanding on anyone, be demanding on yourself and try to refine yourself before you go around and start, worrying about every other person. And so we have a number of slides today, so I'm hoping to keep it under an hour. Is that good? So, jumping into it, look at our overview. We're going to be looking at the halakhic differences between Hillel and Shammai. That is the main point of today's lecture. In the book Jesus the Pharisee, written by Orthodox Jewish Rabbi Harvey Falk, which, by the way, he does not believe Jesus is the Messiah, but he recognizes Jesus as a legitimate Jewish teacher. He's a good guy, and he supports Jesus in this respect. And he wrote this book called Jesus the Pharisee. He says on page 7, the house of Hillel, or Beit Hillel, and Beit Shammai were to clash over 350 times on issues of the oral law during the next 100 years. Nor were these minor disputes. So basically, it's not what's your favorite color, purple or blue, right? It's how are we supposed to pray? How are we supposed to offer the offerings? How are we supposed to do these observances? So they're actually important things. After that, we're going to be talking about, after some of these legal debates that were had, we're not going to be looking at all of them, obviously. There's 350-ish. Just a few. After that, we're going to be looking at some of the anti-Hillelite violence by the Shammite Pharisees, or the zealots that were associated with them. Now, when I mention this violence, please keep in mind it's the Shammite Pharisees or the zealots that were associated with them, that sided with them, that agreed with them. But at that point, it's kind of indistinguishable. And some rabbis even believe it was the Shamites themselves. So, for the sake of brevity, I will simply be saying the murder by the Shamites. Okay? And then we are going to be looking at perhaps my favorite part, which is correlations with the New Testament. So, looking at our chronological map here, the timeline, we're no longer talking about Shemaiah and Avtalion, but we're moving down into the era of Hillel and Shammai, which continues for a little while, which continues for almost 100 years. Which, fortunately for us, that puts into context, at least some context, of the New Testament and some of the writings, some of the events mentioned in the Gospels and Acts. And so hopefully this gives us a little bit of light on that topic. So, going into our first slide, admission to the house of study. What were their views on this? We find some information. If any of you are interested, you can look into this more. In Avot de Rabbi Natan 2:9. Avot de Rabbi Natan literally means the sayings or the ethics or the teachings of Rabbi Nathan. Avot de Rabbi Natan. Now, from Beit Shammai's perspective, only worthy students should be admitted to the study Torah. Basically, if you're not serious about studying Torah, I don't want to deal with you. If you're just going to goof around, if you're only here to learn a few things here and there, get out of my face. I only want the serious students. And there's some merit to that position, right? It's not like it's the worst thing in the world. You don't necessarily need to be the smartest. You just need to be there or be square out the door. You need to actually take Torah study and Bible study seriously. Now, Beit Hillel, the school of Hillel, remember Beit means house or school. Beit Hillel said that Torah may be taught to anyone in the expectation that they will repent and become worthy. So maybe they're just a guy off the street, but if he wants to come in, or she wants to come in, and they say, I'm kind of interested in this Torah stuff. For a long time, I've been feeling I really need to be getting back to God. I just don't know how. What does that even involve? Shammai would say, sorry, we're the big leagues. We're the top dogs. If you're not serious about Torah study, I can't have you making the whole group wait on you, right? You're so far behind, you're going to have to go somewhere else. Hillel, the house of Hillel, would say, come on in, make yourself at home, we'll try to work with you. Well, as long as you actually are going to listen to what we say, I don't mind teaching you. Just try to keep up. If you have any questions, raise your hand, and if it's going to be too long, ask after class. We can meet after class. So, Shammai said, only the worthy students. Hillel said, everyone, if they're willing to actually repent. Right? So it's not just, they're not just here for entertainment. Both said that the students had to at least be interested and want to try. Now, what does Yeshua actually have to say? In Matthew 9:13, he says, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So who does that compare to the most? Shammai, who said only the worthy, or Hillel, who said everyone? Yeshua's statements here are closest to Hillel. He also says in Matthew 15:24, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. So basically, the people who are not worthy. The people actually who are the least worthy. But if these people, if the unrighteous, if the sinners want to be righteous, if they're willing to repent, if they want to become worthy, then they'll come to me, they'll learn what I'm saying, they'll listen to my teachings, and they'll actually try to apply them. And ultimately, they have to apply them. It's not just you try your whole life and you never do it. Right? You need to make some kind of progress. So, the beauty of a wife. We're going to be going through these pretty quickly, hopefully, because we have a number of slides. If you have any questions, ask in the comments. We can talk about them. It's taught, our rabbis taught, how does one dance before the bride? Right? When you get married and there's the wedding dance, how are you supposed to dance before your bride? Because in Judaism, the husband and the wife, they're the ones who primarily dance. It's not like they're putting on a show. It's just that's their thing. You can look it up on YouTube. How does one dance before the bride? Beit Shammai says, the bride as she is. And Beit Hillel says, beautiful and graceful bride, which is quoting the verse. Beit Shammai said to Beit Hillel, if she was lame or blind, does one say of her, beautiful and gracious bride? Whereas the Torah said, keep thee far from a false matter. Said Beit Hillel to Beit Shammai, according to your words, if one has made a bad purchase in the market, should one praise it in his eyes or depreciate it? Surely one should praise it in his eyes. So basically, Shammai saying, Hillel, you're saying that you should call your wife beautiful even if she's not really a looker, right? We're told not to lie. How can you call your ugly wife, sorry, but your ugly wife, how can you call her a looker? How can you say that she's so beautiful and graceful if she's crippled or if she's blind or something like this? And Hillel says something interesting. He says, if you go to the store and you find an apple and you buy the apple and it's got a bruise on it, are you going to say that it's a horrible apple? Or are you going to eat the good part? Are you going to praise it for the good fruit that it has? So basically, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you think that your wife is beautiful, Or if you want her to be beautiful and you only want to look at her good aspects, which really we should be doing anyways, if you only want to look at her good aspects, that's up to you. And then you can praise her for being a beautiful and graceful bride. And that's going to make her feel like $1,000,000. $1,000,000 shekels. So what does Yeshua say? Yeshua says a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him. So basically, a good person has good stuff hiding in his heart, and he brings out some of this good stuff from time to time when he's interacting with people. So basically, a good tree has good fruit, right? Using analogies from another verse. And an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him, right? It's from the things that are within that make us unclean. Which, that's a totally different discussion. But he's saying, look, evil people are going to act like dirt. And they're going to use the Torah as an excuse to treat people like dirt. Good people are going to use the Torah to treat people well, to bring the good out. So once again, Yeshua is siding with Beit Hillel. He's siding with Hillel, who says to be merciful with the wife, find her good points, and look at those good points and say, those good points are beautiful, and that makes you a beautiful and graceful bride. Right? And men, this is what we need to be doing anyways. Look at the good points in your wives, or your girlfriends, or even anybody in general. Look at those good points, compliment those good points, reinforce, through positive reinforcement, those good points. And if there's bad points, try not to bring them up, because every point of criticism is a little dagger right in the heart. And women tend to take that criticism, especially from their husbands, very seriously if they love their husbands. And they might not show it, but it kills them. And so I think that it is best to listen to what Hillel and Yeshua agreed on, which is that if you're a good person, bring forth the good things. Right? If you have good things in your bank account, bring them out and share them with people. Right? In your moral bank account, so to speak. But if you're bringing out all this bad stuff, it indicates you're not a good person. You're actually a bad person. And we see something similar in Proverbs 10:21. It says, the lips of the righteous nourish many. Do you want your words to nourish people, or do you want your words to kill people? Do you want to be a murderer, or do you want to be someone who raises others up and encourages them and heals them with your words? Your words, good and pleasant words, are like a balm or an ointment or a medicine on a wound. Your words have the power to heal people or kill people. And it's up to us, through training, through learning the Torah, to guide us to know what is what. To know, are these words good or are these words bad? Are these words death or are these words life? Are these words killing and illness, or are these words healing and life? Next slide. In regards to Hanukkah and the order in which you light the candles on a Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah, Beit Shammai said 8 lights are lit on the first night and 1 less each night afterwards. So basically you light all 8 the first night of Hanukkah. The second night you light 7. The third night you light less and less and less until the last night of Hanukkah you end up with 1 candle. Hillel said the exact opposite. The first night you start with 1, the second night you start with 2, and so on, until on the 8th night you have 8 candles. And that's because, it's because Hillel said you want throughout that festival to have increasing light, because light is good. You want to start out with the smallest possible, because we're working within a finite material universe, right? We can't have infinite light everywhere. You have 8 candles, so you want to do one the first night. And because you want to increase the joy of the festival, light more the second night. Light even more the third night. Light even more than that the fourth and the fifth and sixth and seventh and eighth nights. Until you have a full, fiery, blazing, beautiful menorah that you're looking at. And really, if you've ever lit a Hanukkah menorah, it is actually really beautiful. I never realized until I actually did it. It's like, it's just a candle, it's dripping wax, put a little plate under it, and it's on fire, But when you actually do it, it is actually really beautiful, and I really enjoyed it. The first time that I did it was this past year, and it was a nice experience. It was very special. Now, actually, the only reference in the Old or New Testament of Hanukkah is mentioned in the book of John, mentioned once. And so if you want to talk about New Testament holidays, Hanukkah is a New Testament holiday. In John 10:22 through 23, it says, "At that time, the Feast of the Dedication took place at Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Yeshua was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon," or in Solomon's porch, it depends on the translation. Now, where do you find Hanukkah in here? Well, it says, "At that time, the Feast of Dedication." What is that? In Hebrew, that would be Chag, C-H-A-G, for feast, and dedication is Hanukkah. Chag Hanukkah. The festival of Hanukkah. And in fact, in many study Bibles nowadays, you'll actually see that footnote that it says, this is referring to the Festival of Lights, otherwise known as Hanukkah. And so we see here, Yeshua went up into the temple during Hanukkah, where they had an enormous menorah that they would light during the Festival of Hanukkah. Now, here's a question. When Yeshua went up into the temple during Hanukkah, which lighting procedure, Beit Hillel or Beit Shammai, which one would he have seen? So let's say it's the first night of Hanukkah that Yeshua went up, and we don't know when he went up, but sometime during the festival, let's pretend that it was the first night. Would he have seen all 8, according to Shammai, or 1, according to Hillel? Shammai, his school, Beit Shammai, was in charge of determining these things at the time. And so when Yeshua was in the temple, he would have seen all 8 on the first night, or 7 candles on the second night, or 6 candles on the third night, and so on. Maybe he went on the last night, maybe he only saw 1, who knows. But he would have seen Shammite halacha in practice because he was at the temple during Hanukkah, right? He would have been seeing this mistaken halakha, or this not quite right halakha, going on. And so, maybe maybe this adds new meaning to, him starting to teach, I am the light of the world, right? Maybe he's the 8 candles on the 8th night light of the world, or the first candle on the first night light of the world, in accordance with Hillel. I just find that really interesting because this is something that we don't really think about, and until we know that this was even an issue, we don't even care, right? Okay, he was in the temple, big deal, whatever. Feast of Dedication, whatever that is, just the Jewish thing. But we're looking into like the real practical aspect of history. How would they have actually done things? Well, this is exactly what they would have done. They would have been doing this in the temple according to Shammai. But as we've seen so far, Jesus was more in accordance with Hillel. And so if the trend continues, we can assume, I think very accurately, that Yeshua would not have been, if everybody had their own personal Hanukkahs, that he would not have been lighting his Hanukkah in accordance with Shammai. It would have been in accordance with Hillel. Or maybe he saw the menorah and said, "Ugh, you guys got it all wrong. but I'm not in charge. I'm not going to say anything, or I don't know. But anyways, in regards to divorce, in the Mishnah in Gittin 90a, Gittin literally means divorce documents. A get is something that you give, that a husband gives his wife. It is the writ of divorce in the Torah. When Moses says, you shall give her a writ of divorce, you shall give her a get. Gittin means divorce documents. So this is, just to put that in a little bit of context. In Gittin 90a, it says, Beit Shammai say, a man should not divorce his wife unless he has found her guilty of some unseemly conduct. As it says, because he hath found some unseemly thing in her, right? Beit Hillel, however, say that he may divorce her even if she has merely spoiled his food. And it's not like she just burns dinner, oh, I'm divorcing you. It's actually referring to actually unseemly conduct. But it's a little bit different, and Hillel again takes the liberal view, Shammai takes the strict view. And we see something a little interesting, something a little out of the ordinary, and this may be the only time that Yeshua actually agrees with Shammai. In Matthew 19, verses 3 through 9, it says, some Pharisees came to Jesus, testing him and asking, they're testing him just to see, are you with Shammai or are you with Hillel? It's not, oh, we're out to get Jesus and we want to test him to trap him. Right? They're not crazy witches or something. They're out not to, convict him of something. They're curious to see, is this rabbi who appears on the scene, he's got so many followers, where does he fall within the spectrum? Is he closer to Hillel or is he closer to Shammai? And Yeshua kind of throws him a boomerang. It's going one direction, it goes off in another way. He usually takes the Hillel position, but we see something a little different here. It says, some Pharisees came to Jesus, asking him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? They do not say, divorce his wife. Everybody knows that divorce is permissible. But they're asking for any reason at all, right? Sorry, honey, I woke up this morning and you look like an ugly hag. I'm divorcing you, right? Is that basically what they're asking? You woke up and you got a crick in your neck and you blame your wife. We're getting a divorce, right? That's what they're asking. Any reason at all. And Jesus answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? So basically he's like, you big dummies, haven't you read Genesis 1? He made them male and female and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And all the Pharisees are like, duh, yeah, we know this. We've memorized this. So this is Yeshua's conclusion based on Genesis. So, they are no longer two, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Now remember, there's two women that bring a baby to King Solomon, and they say they say, this woman has taken my baby, and the other woman says, no, this is my baby, and they're saying, no, it's my baby, no, it's my baby. And Solomon, in his wisdom, says, cut it in half, cut the baby in half, and both of you can have half. That's fair, isn't it? Knowing that the true mother would rather the baby live and be without it than kill it and get half. Right? He knew that the mother would be too merciful for this. And so, it's kind of the same principle here. That what God has put together through marriage, you can't cut it in half. They're already one flesh. They're one body. They're one. It's like in the Solomon example. They're one baby. You can't just cut it in half, and for it to still live. People are going to walk away from that dead. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery. So who does Yeshua actually side with this time? He sides with the strict opinion. He sides with Shammai, who said a man should not divorce his wife unless he has found her guilty of some unseemly conduct. So maybe people thought that he was a Shammai Pharisee after that, if they didn't follow him around for too long. But I find it fascinating that he's usually, you might call him a liberal Pharisee. In fact, I had a professor call him a liberal Pharisee. And so it's funny why he would take this stance. And it's because Yeshua says in Matthew 5:20 that your righteousness must surpass the Pharisees. Right? Shammai was often in the habit, the school of Shammai was often in the habit of being the strictest. Yeshua was not saying you got to be Shammite Pharisees because they were wrong in a lot of respects. But in this particular instance, Yeshua is saying, look, they're right about this, and we need to uphold this if we're going to be very righteous, moral people. And it's not right to divorce the wife. The man can keep on working, but it's extremely hard in that culture for a divorced woman to get by. In fact, many of them would resort to prostitution. And Yeshua knew this. He wasn't a dummy. He knew that many divorced women would either become beggars or prostitutes. And knowing this, he's like, look, if she gets into the occult, or she's hanging out with other guys, right? She commits adultery on you. She's worshiping other gods. She, all these other things. If she's being an immoral person, that's permissible to divorce her. But you don't like the way she looks. You don't like the way she nags you sometimes. You don't like the way, maybe she's put on a lot of weight, especially after having your children. You don't like the way her laugh is, how it's cackly. Tough crap. You're the one who married her. Right? This is on your head. Maybe this is to inspire you to change something in yourself. Maybe she's revealing a flaw in you that you need to work on. You ever thought about that? And so he actually, in a very rare occurrence, actually sides with Shammai. But we'll see that this is not typically what happens. So, in the laws of Corban, which we all know about this, at least a little bit about this, we find in the Mishnah, in the oral law, it says 4 kinds of vows the sages have declared to be binding. Other kinds of vows, not so much, right? They're just people talking. Like, oh, I bet you $1 million you couldn't do that, right? Nobody actually plans to give $1 million. But these are serious vows. 4 kinds of vows the sages have declared to be binding. Vows of incitement, vows of exaggeration, vows made in error, and vows that cannot be fulfilled by reason of constraint. If a man saw others eating his figs and said, "May they be Corban to you," and they were found to be his father and his brothers, and others with them, the school of Shammai say, for them the vow is not binding, but for the others with them it is binding. The school of Hillel says the vow is binding for neither for them. So this just gives us a little bit of information regarding the vows regarding Corban. And some other examples about Corban are also listed in Nedarim 3:5, which if you want to access the Mishnah online or you have your own Mishnah at home, you're welcome to look into that more. But that just gives us a little bit of insight into maybe what Yeshua was referring to when he says, you vow things to the temple and say that they're Corban, but you neglect your family, right? We saw that there was friends and family, or family and friends, mentioned in this passage, right? That the food could go to the family, but not for the friends. Right? If I'm understanding that correctly. Now, Havdalah. Havdalah was a ceremony that you would do at the end of Shabbat, the end of the Sabbath, and this was one of the things that the men of the Great Assembly instituted for Israel during the time of Ezra. In fact, I think we covered this a little bit. Along with blessings and prayers and sanctifications and Havdalahs, according to the Talmud. Now, we also find in Tractate Barakot, it says, Beit Shammai say that the proper order of doing this little ceremony, it takes maybe, 10, 15 minutes, is you light the candle, you say grace, you smell the spices. There's a little container, you open it up and you smell the spices, and Havdalah. While Beit Hillel says light, spices, grace, and Havdalah. And so the way that it is done today is, as is the case with almost everything, we side with Hillel. So, moving on. In terms of kosher, in terms of kashrut, or sometimes you might hear it kashrus, in terms of meat and cheese, if you know anything about Judaism, you probably know that you cannot eat meat and cheese together, right? Bacon cheeseburgers are like the most unkosher thing you can possibly eat. And so there's this debate in terms of, we know that red meat and dairy products, chalev, cannot be eaten together. But what about birds? Because bird meat has kind of an interesting halakhic status where it's not as meaty as red meat, but it's still meat. It can be kind of confusing sometimes. And so it says, fowl, birds, fowl goes up on the table with cheese, but it is not eaten. So basically you can have poultry, birds, and dairy products on the same table. It's not just cheese. In Hebrew, it's referring to the same thing. I'm sorry, the same thing as dairy products. You can have both of these on the same table, but you can't eat them together. So basically, somebody wants to have a glass of milk, and somebody else wants to have a chicken sandwich. Can both of those products be on the same table? Shammai actually takes the more lenient position here, and he says, sure, you can have them both on the same table, just don't eat them. And the house of Hillel says it does not go up and it is not eaten. So Hillel actually takes the stricter opinion. He says, get that stuff off the table. We're not going to, don't even get close to sinning. We don't want that stuff on the table. Don't eat it. I don't even want the temptation to eat it. Because if I smell that chicken sandwich, I might want to wash it down with a glass of milk. And that's a big no-no. So... So this is one of the lenient rulings of the house of Shammai and the strict ruling of the house of Hillel. And this is not common, but that is one of the exceptions. This to show you guys that it's not always Hillel, mercy, Shammai, strict, right? They're not these monolithic groups. They're not, always the same like that. Sometimes Hillel was strict and sometimes Shammai was more liberal or more lenient. But those are exceptions. Now, in regards to the reciting the Shema, if any of you know, the beginning of the Shema goes, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, and the Lord is one. Right? So, we read, the house of Shammai says, in the evening, everyone should recline, like lie on their sides or lie in bed or something like that, in order to recite the Shema, and in the morning, they should stand up, as it says in the passage of the Shema, when you lie down and when you rise. But the house of Hillel says, everyone may recite according to his own manner, whether reclining or standing, as it says, and as you walk by the way. Walk by the way, in Hillel's view, could possibly be referring to what is the way that you do it? Walk according to that way. Or as you walk by the way, it's neither standing or reclining. So maybe you just do both, or do whatever you feel like doing. And that's actually what is the halakha. We go according to Hillel. So no matter where you are, during the times that you say the Shema, you say them wherever you are. Now, if you want to be strict, you are definitely permitted to, you can jump out of bed and say it, or you can at night get in bed and lie down, literally, and then say it. When you lie down and when you arise, when you walk by the way, you shall be speaking of the words of the Lord, right? And this is that passage. Their view on Gentiles and conversion. This is very, very interesting and very pertinent to our discussion about Paul and his mission. In the Mishnah, in Avot 112, we actually covered this already, but just to rehash it, says, Hillel says, be among the disciples of Aaron, the high priest, loving peace, pursuing peace, loving people. That's a lot of love. You sure Hillel isn't a hippie or like a Jesus follower or something? And bringing them close to the Torah. Loving peace, pursuing peace, loving people, bringing them close to the Torah. This is the duty of people. And so this was not actually something that was incumbent only toward other Jews. This was something incumbent on all mankind. And this is perhaps why Hillel, as we've noticed a few times before, why Hillel was merciful toward the Gentiles and Shammai was strict. There's a story that goes like this. On one occasion, it happened that a certain heathen, a Gentile, came before Shammai and said to him, make me a convert, on one condition, that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. Right, he's kind of maybe being a bit of a stinker here. He's like, basically he's asking him, teach me a condensed version of the Torah in like a few sentences. What are the main points? That's what while I stand on one foot means. It's like, I can't stand on one foot all day, people. Hurry up and teach me the main point of the Torah. Thereupon, Shammai repulsed him with the builder's cubit. And he had this yardstick in his hand, and he's kind of pushing him away. He's like, get out of here, you're talking nonsense. When he went before Hillel, when the Gentile went before Hillel, he said to him, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah, while the rest is the commentary thereof, so go and learn it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Who said that before? I think that Yeshua might have said that before, right? Yeshua said that was the loving people, loving God and loving your neighbor. The entire Torah hangs on that, right? And what does Hillel say? Love peace, pursue peace, loving people, bringing them close to the Torah. And what else does he say? What's hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. That's the whole Torah, and the rest is the commentary. Go and learn it. So basically, the entire Torah, the point of the Torah is how to love your neighbor. All the other commandments teach you how to do that. All the other commandments are the commentary on how to love your neighbor. So basically, if you want to love your neighbor, eat kosher. If you want to love your neighbor, give to charity. If you want to love your neighbor, have a happy countenance, as Hillel said. Or maybe that was Italian, I don't know. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So we see that Yeshua is, yet again, is close to Hillel in saying in expressing love, in emphasizing love. And what does he tell the disciples in Matthew 28? He says, Go unto all nations and teach them what I taught you. What did Yeshua teach the disciples? Right? The Quran? The New Testament that hadn't been written yet? The Bhagavad Gita from Hinduism? No, he's teaching the Bible that existed. He's teaching the Tanakh. He's teaching the Torah. And in fact, everything that he taught, all of his moral teachings, can be found in the Torah, supported by the Torah. They are manifestations of Torah commandments, and they're already taught in Judaism. And we'll be looking at some of these, so have no fear, the correlations are here. Pretty soon, at least. And so, anyways, we have another example where Yeshua is actually siding with Hillel. Now, regarding some of the violence, we talked about this last time, the violence against Beit Hillel, the school of Hillel, by the school of Shammai, Beis Shammai. From the Jewish Encyclopedia, published about 100 years ago, it says, as all the nations around Judea made common cause with the Romans, the Zealots were naturally inflamed against every one of them, and therefore the Shammites proposed to prevent all communication between Jew and Gentile by prohibiting the Jews from buying any article of food or drink from the heathen neighbors. The Hillelites, now remember, Peter says it is unlawful for me to eat with Gentiles, right? Where does it say that in the Torah? It don't say that nowhere in the Torah. Because this was something that Shammai had in his school, his disciples, had mandated. That Jews cannot buy food from Gentiles. And, by the way, I will admit, that's a really good idea at that time. In a certain context. Because, long story short, we don't have time to get into this today, but long story short, Gentiles would sometimes intentionally try to screw with the Jews and put pork blood in wine or in bread or in certain products and then sell them to Jews and then say, hey, we just made you sin. Why? Because people are screwed up and they didn't like Jews. There was actually anti-Semitism in the Roman Empire at this time, and especially after this time. That many Romans just did not like Jews. And some of it was because of the intelligentsia that were very conservative. They didn't like this foreign ideology called the Bible. And you had very traditional pagans who were scared that this new God was coming in to replace their God, and they feared that if people abandoned the gods, that Rome would no longer be protected. So there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the Roman Empire. This didn't affect everyone, but it affected a number of people. And so, continuing with this article, the Hillelites, still moderate in their religious and political views, would not agree to such sharply defined exclusiveness. But when the Sanhedrin was called together to consider the propriety of such measures, of such anti-Gentile measures, the Shammites, with the aid of the Zealots, gained the day. Eleazar ben Ananias, or ben Hananiah, as it would be in Hebrew, invited the disciples of both schools to meet at his house. Hey everyone, come over to my house. We're having a Torah Bible study party. Right? But it was a trap. Armed men were stationed at the door and instructed to permit everyone to enter, but no one to leave. During the discussions that were carried on under these circumstances, many Hillelites are said to have been killed, and there and then the remainder adopted the restrictive propositions of the Shammites, known in the Talmud as the 18 Articles, or the 18 Edicts. Now these were anti-Gentile measures that apparently Peter was influenced by, because he says, it's not lawful for me to eat with Gentiles, but God has shown me that I shall not call any man unclean, according to Acts 10 and Acts 11. the vision of the animals coming down in the sheet, Peter explains his own vision. He says it's about human beings, it is not about animals, and it has everything to do with these 18 articles that Shammai was promoting at this time and forcing on people. That these were anti-Gentile measures, and Peter says, God has shown me that Shammai is wrong. God has shown me that the 18 articles are bad. Wow. On account of the violence which attended these enactments, and because of the radicalism of the enactments themselves, the day on which the Shammites thus triumphed over the Hillelites was thereafter regarded as a day of misfortune. This was a dark day according to the rabbis and the sages. Which, by the way, the rabbis and the sages normally don't include the disciples of Shammai. On that day, 3,000 students were killed. This was kind of a big deal. So when Yeshua says, "Your fathers killed the prophets, why should I have anything to do with you? You're coming after me for supposedly casting out demons by the power of Satan, and here are your sons casting out demons. What about them?" Now it's interesting. According to the Shulchan Aruch, which is a legal code that we'll be getting into eventually. That's my intention, at least. It's based on the Mishnah. It comes much later. It's the Reader's Digest version. This day was actually later declared a day of fasting. The day that Shammai had killed, the Shammai Pharisees had killed the Hillelite Pharisees. This was a day of fasting. A day of mourning. Unfortunately, because there's so many fast days and so many celebrations in Judaism, introducing a new one never really caught on. And it was not necessarily a new one, but it was not ever very common, and when it was introduced or reintroduced in the Shulchan Aruch, it didn't really catch on. Now, if I found out what day that is, I might actually do it myself, just in solidarity with Yeshua and the Hillelite Pharisees. I mean, it might be kind of a good thing to do. Who knows? Okay, so in terms of who do we side with, we're almost done, folks. Thank you for hanging on. Who do we side with? It says, when the elders came to the house of Gadiah in Jericho, a heavenly voice proclaimed to them, "There is a man among you worthy of the Holy Spirit, but this generation is unfit for it." And they fixed their eyes on Hillel the elder. This bat kol, this heavenly voice, a voice comes from heaven and says, "There is a man among you who deserves the Holy Spirit, but this generation, forget about it." Everyone looks to Hillel. Why? Because he had the Holy Spirit. He was a good judge. He was also the teacher of Paul through Gamaliel. Gamaliel was his grandson and continued in that Hillel Pharisee tradition. So when a decision can't be reached, sometimes there are on certain occasions that a heavenly voice appears and supports Hillel. And these are in all the places listed on the screen. We're not going to be listing all of these. Again, in Yebamot 14a, it says, Beit Shammai was very scholarly and learned, but Beit Hillel was supported because of their love for humility. So and that's not a quote, by the way, that's a paraphrase. So basically, Beit Shammai, the Shammites were very scholarly, they were very knowledgeable, they were really smart guys. No one would ever call them a dummy. But sometimes some of that knowledge got to their head. They had good knowledge, but sometimes it puffed them up a little bit. Why should I listen to you? You're not as smart as me. What are you talking about? How can you possibly make that legal decision? I'm smarter than you. They probably wouldn't say it quite like that, but there's probably that attitude. And they had good reason to think that because many of them were very, very smart. But they were strict with other people, not just themselves. The whole point of Torah knowledge, of studying the Bible, is to refine ourselves. And if other people want help, we can help them. But our job is not to change the world, it's to change ourselves. And we can help other people, again, like I said. But our primary focus has to be on ourselves and changing the sin inside of us to get the beam out of our own eye and not worry about other specks in other people's eyes. The school of Hillel, while they were not quite as educated, they were still very smart people, by the way. They were still very scholarly, very brilliant people. But they loved humility even more. And it was basically the attitude of all Torah knowledge is in vain. All knowledge about the Bible is meaningless if you're an arrogant jerk. If you're not humble and if you're not gentle with people, you have no place teaching. If you're going to act in a way that is contrary to what you teach, forget about it. You have to practice what you preach. And perhaps this gets at what Yeshua was criticizing certain Pharisees about. You whitewashed tombs or sepulchres. You do one thing and you teach another. You teach this over here, but then you go and do the opposite thing. What's the deal? Again, this might have been alluding to certain Shammai Pharisees. And this is not to say that the Shammaites were unrighteous. There were many righteous Shammai Pharisees. Some of them might have kind of tipped over the edge, though. Some of them might have become arrogant. Some of them might have thought, I'm so learned, maybe I can get away with certain exceptions sometimes. I'm so smart, I know what I'm doing. I know that this little tiny technicality, I can utilize that. But maybe it was actually a transgression. According to the Talmud, the day of the enactment of Shammai's 18 edicts is comparable to the day of the golden calf. Basically, these anti-Gentile measures are comparable to the Israelites' idolatry of worshiping the golden calf. That's how bad it was. So no wonder Yeshua was pissed when certain Pharisees came up and started debating with him. Or not just debating with him, but arguing and criticizing him. They're being critical. They're being harsh. They're being unrighteous. It's like, look, you guys are basically worshiping a golden calf because of these anti-Gentiles, unrighteous edicts that Shammai had proposed and passed. However, in the Tosefta, in Yevamot 1:3, it states that the two schools would intermarry, and in the Talmud it says that many also showed love and friendship toward one another. So as much as we've been focusing on the violence that happened and the disagreement that happened, there's many good Shammai Pharisees. There was many good Hillel Pharisees. And oftentimes they loved each other. In fact, this was one of the signs of Phariseeism, that they loved each other, according to Josephus. They loved each other. They would intermarry. And sometimes there'd be a few problems here and there in terms of which halakha the house would abide by if they married. But these were minor problems in a sense compared to Sadducees or Samaritans. Right? They would never intermarry with those people. But these Pharisee groups would intermarry. They would often, maybe not in the early days, but maybe a little afterwards, they would get along a lot of the time. In the early days, things started off pretty bad, but over time, they learned to talk things out. They learned to cooperate. They learned to listen to one another. And things actually got decent. So I don't want to make Shammai look like a villain and Hillel the hero. But, because there were good things from both. That's all I'm trying to say. So correlations to the New Testament. Archaeologist James Tabor, which by the way I'm not generally a fan of, but I liked overall this book, although there were some things I disagreed with. The Jesus Dynasty. It definitely raised some interesting questions. He says, although there was a more conservative wing of the Pharisees led by the first century Rabbi Shammai, his rival Rabbi Hillel seemed to have had the greater influence. It is common to think of Jesus as the bitter enemy of all Pharisees, when in fact many of his views on Jewish law reflect the more accommodating positions of Rabbi Hillel. By the way, this guy doesn't even believe in Jesus. He's not a believer at all, and he still recognizes that, hey, these guys agree on basically everything. Now, I use him because I think that the secular people, when they look at the New Testament, they're not being swayed by this denomination or that denomination. In some cases, they don't even believe that Jesus existed. But the point, James Tabor does believe that he existed, by the way. My point is that if even secular people can notice this, and it's not just a few, I mean it's dozens, if not more, then what is stopping the church from not realizing that there are similarities in these teachings? And I would argue that what's stopping many people in the church, or many Christians, well, first of all, they just don't know. People don't tend to study this. And that's why studying history, I think, can be the most, is the most radical, mind-altering thing, mind-altering substance that you can take. And it's 100% safe because it's not a drug. But it's the thing that can really set you free once you realize the golden rule was taught before Jesus was born. What are the implications of that? Does that mean that Yeshua was somebody else's student and that Yeshua studied under another rabbi? And to answer that question, I personally don't know, so I'm not trying to suggest something here. Does it mean that he had learned this and was continuing to teach it because it was a good teaching? Sure. There's nothing wrong with that. Jesus quoted the Bible all the time, and the Bible was written hundreds, if not thousands of years before him. So what's wrong with quoting people from the past if what they said is true? And we see that Yeshua was actually teaching a lot of Hillel Pharisaic principles and teachings and doctrines, and not just legal teachings, but also other kinds of teachings, like about the end times, about the coming of the Messiah, and about the afterlife as well. Now, there's a rabbi who lived, I think, in the 1700s. His name is Rabbi Jacob Emden. And he says about Paul, these are just more correlations to the New Testament. He says, Paul was a scholar. A Jewish rabbi says that Paul was a scholar. Paul was a scholar and an attendant of Rabban Gamliel the elder. Or in Hebrew, that'd be Rabban Gamliel Hazakan. Jacob Emden, the 1700s Orthodox Jewish rabbi, says that Paul is a scholar and the student of Gamaliel. I find that fascinating. And what else is fascinating is that Gamaliel was the grandson of Hillel and belonged to Beit Hillel. So we see, again, this influence of Hillel on the early believers. Another Orthodox Jewish rabbi who wrote Jesus the Pharisee, Rabbi Harvey Falk, he says Yeshua HaNotzri, Jesus of Nazareth, was actually a follower of Hillel. Now, I don't know if I'd say that directly, but I'd say at least the general idea has some truth to it. And mind you, this is a Jewish rabbi who doesn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but he accepts him as a brother, a fellow rabbi, and as a good Jew, which is a lot better than what some believe. Yeshua HaNotzri was actually a follower of Hillel. Any criticism of the Pharisees attributed to him was in reality directed against the opposing school of Shammai, who were in control of the Pharisees at that time, 30 AD. Wow. So we see that we have Orthodox Jewish rabbis basically calling the founders of Nazarenism, that's not quite Christianity yet, but the founders and the leaders of the Nazarene movement, they're calling them good Jews, good Pharisees, good scholars. And even if you disagree with these assessments, they're still saying very positive, glowing things about them, which you have to wonder if they disagreed with modern Orthodox Jews of today. Why do these Orthodox Jewish rabbis seem to like them? Why are they saying all these nice things about them if they're not actually true? Like if Paul and Jesus, for example, were super anti-Pharisee, they hated the Pharisees and everything the Pharisees stood for, why would the descendants of the Pharisees be praising them? Just a thought. Just a thought. Lastly, in Yevamot 16a, the tractate in the Talmud, a man calls his brother, who is from Beit Shammai, he says, "You are the firstborn son of Satan." And it's because this brother, like I said, belonged to Beit Shammai. And the other man was from Beit Hillel. He's calling his own brother the firstborn son of Satan. And this is in a certain case. It's not about everything. But doesn't this remind us of a time when Yeshua says, "You are of your father the devil"? Again, which Pharisees is Yeshua talking about? Is he talking about the nice and gentle and humble and merciful Hillel Pharisees? Or the Shammite Pharisees who are sometimes too strict and too justice-oriented? Which, by the way, justice is a wonderful thing. We need more justice in the world. But these people took it a little bit too far. And Yeshua says, "You are of your father the devil." Pharisees would say this. And we know, we're not just imagining things, we know because it's written down that a Pharisee called his brother, who was also a Pharisee, "You are a firstborn son of Satan." So please do not imagine that Yeshua's critique of certain little cliques of Pharisees that would come and see him were all bad. In fact, we'll be getting into later that there's many Pharisees who actually loved and supported and honored Jesus and his apostles and his disciples. But that is for another day. We're going to have to leave it on that cliffhanger. So I hope that I stayed within my 1 hour. Looks like I went a little bit over. But I think we did okay. So hopefully by this point you are Hillel and Shammai experts. You need to go to church and say, "Hillel and Shammai!" And then everyone will look at you, and then it's a great opportunity for you to explain. Or maybe not. Maybe there are better ways. I'm just joking, by the way. But in all seriousness, hopefully you are amateur experts in Hillel and Shammai now. You know who they were. You know who their teachers were. You know some of the things that they disagreed about, what some of their rulings were, and what some of their schools taught. And not only that, but we've looked at how their rulings and their attitudes and their actions and the descendants of Hillel and Shammai, in a philosophical sense, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, how they affected later times, and how Jesus and Paul and the early believers, the Nazarenes, how they compared to these two groups of Pharisees. And we found that Yeshua, actually happened to agree with Hillel most of the time. Because Yeshua taught, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Blessed are the warm fuzzies. There's a place for justice, but I have not come to judge, right? This is what he said. I have not come to condemn the world. I have not come to condemn the world. I have come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I have come only for the sick. He's taking Hillel's approach, and you could even argue, ramping it up, putting it on steroids. We want everyone to learn the Torah from the mouth of Mashiach, from the mouth of the Messiah, which in Judaism, when the Messiah comes, it says that he will bring Torah teachings to a whole new level. He is a teacher par excellence. He's the best teacher. And so when we see Yeshua hanging out with hookers and tax collectors, basically strippers and IRS agents, that's not really not really the kind of people you expect a good, traditional, conservative, modest rabbi to be hanging out with. Is hookers and IRS agents, and just common people that sometimes the other rabbis just didn't have time for, or maybe they didn't have the patience for, or maybe they didn't want hanging out with those people to elicit bad thoughts in their minds, and they didn't want to become corrupted. But Yeshua was the man for the job. And so in the coming weeks, in the coming months, I hope that these lessons that we'll be getting into demonstrate the extent to which there are connections, but also the extent to how Yeshua took some of these very traditional teachings, put them on steroids, and emphasized them and taught them and supported them and emphasized them so much. So basically, that is all for today. And like I bid you last time, make sure to greet people with a cheerful countenance, a happy confidence, smile at people, be good to one another. And whatever is hateful to you, do not do unto your neighbor. Whatever you would have done unto you, do unto others. So we'll finish with a quote from Hillel / Jesus, and may you have a wonderful, blessed day.